Hi, I'm Sean Cantwell, and this is the new Scaling Success podcast. We started Scaling Success to provide a space for entrepreneurs and business leaders to discuss the important topics that contribute to building a valuable and long-lasting enterprise, and to juxtapose our view as investors with that of entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs who are on the front lines. Episodes are now on Spotify. I am honored to welcome Mindy Grossman to the podcast today. One of Fast Company's most creative people in business and Fortune's Business Person of the Year, Mindy is a high-energy, disruptive leader with over 38 years of experience in building and transforming consumer brands. In July of 2017, Mindy joined WW, formerly Weight Watchers, as president and CEO. In this role, Mindy leads thousands of employees in 10 markets to serve the millions of WW members around the world. Previously, she held senior executive roles, including CEO of HSN and CEO of IAC Retail. She also served as a global vice president at Nike, where she oversaw its $4 billion apparel business, and served as co-chair of Nike's Women's Leadership Council. Earlier in her career, Mindy served as president and CEO of Polo Jeans Company and held senior positions at Tommy Hilfiger and Oxford Industries. Mindy has received many accolades throughout her career, including PR Week's Top 50 Health Influencers, Time Magazine's 50 Most Influential People in Healthcare, and Forbes Magazine's The 100 Most Powerful Women. In addition, Mindy serves as a member of Volition Capital's Strategic Advisory Board. Wow, I need a minute to catch my breath there, Mindy. Welcome to the podcast. Thrilled to have you today.
Sean, I'm thrilled to be here too and to be part of Volition's world.
So Mindy, I'm sure, I don't know if I left anything out of that intro, but I'm sure our listeners would love to hear a little bit about your career journey in your own words.
Well, it's been an interesting journey to say the least, and have to admit there's an update. It's been over 40 years, which is kind of scary to think about. It was a very unconventional and still remains a bit of an unconventional journey. I started out planning to be an attorney and had an aha moment in my last semester of college and said, no, I think I want to be on the creative side of business. So moved to New York. I was all of 20 because I started college really young and ended up spending the first 15 years of my career in the menswear business, which at the time, starting in 1977, was unusual for a woman to have senior roles in the menswear industry. But, I worked for an incredible group of designers, from Jeffrey Banks and Willie Smith, two of Black emerging designers who really understood the intersection of culture and business. Worked for Tommy Hilfiger, and then, as you said, for Ralph Lauren, then moving on and starting Polo Jeans Company, men's and women's, sold that to Jones, New York, joined Nike as their global head of apparel. And what you mentioned, which was a very important element of my time there, co-chairing their Women's Leadership Council, but also being very focused on diversity and inclusion within the organization. Surprised a lot of people by leaving there and joining Barry Diller to take over IAC Retail, which most people didn't even know what it was. They owned HSN, at the time, TV shopping network, as well as a portfolio of direct-to-consumer catalog brands like Frontgate, Ballard Design, et cetera. Pretty significant direct-to-consumer portfolio at a very, very critical juncture of how the world was changing in terms of its utilization of mobility and how people were interacting with content, how brands were becoming distribution captive. Worked with Barry for a number of years and then spun out and took the company public as HSNi and led that business and truly transformed it into an editorial program content platform integrating technology, entertainment, and community. And then, as you mentioned, 4 years ago, in a couple of weeks, I made the decision, a very important decision for me, at a point in my life where I promised myself that if I was going to do one more significant thing, I wanted to deliver both a human return and a financial return on equity. And so the opportunity to lead the transformation of this incredible brand, which has been transforming lives for over 57 years around healthy weight loss built on the power of community, but now truly transform it to a technology experience company with a human overlay across the entire ecosystem of wellness, is very exciting, especially given what we have all experienced over the past year. It's more important than ever to give people a partner, actually, in how they can live their best, healthiest lives. So, I always say it's been a very unconventional journey, that sometimes you go sideways to go forward, but thrilled to have an incredible organization, but more importantly, an incredible platform to really lead what is so needed today around the democratization of health and wellness.
What an incredible journey. And I think we could fill hours of time on this podcast taking this conversation in a number of different directions. One of the things I most admire about you is how you've used your platform and your position of influence to advance a variety of different diversity initiatives, which is really where I want to focus a bulk of the conversation today. And I think it might be helpful for our listeners to understand from your standpoint, why does diversity matter so much?
Yeah, I'm really thrilled to be having this conversation, because it is something at the core of not just who I am and what I believe in, but it's so important from a societal perspective, from an individual perspective, but very much from a business perspective. And this is not a new revelation. First of all, there's pure empirical evidence that companies who really believe in diversity and live that have greater business success, greater innovation. They attract great talent. They keep that talent, and ultimately they have a bigger impact. And this goes for boards, it goes for leadership teams, and what we've seen again over the past year around the issues that we have around gaps in access, and we've seen significant issues in underserved communities, in disruption, in what's happening right now with women coming out of the workplace because of those disparities. I think organizations and individuals and CEOs and entrepreneurs and founders, I think it's really critical that diversity is embraced at all levels and becomes not just part of culture, but a fundamental business imperative within any business. And regardless of where anyone's organization is in this journey, we can all do more. We can all be more deliberate. We can all be more accountable, be greater advocates, and take greater action because of the impact that we can have, certainly on our business, but just overall.
Mindy, I think your career in some ways is probably an interesting case study, because you mentioned it's now been a 40-year journey. And I'm sure you've observed some changes to the workplace culture from 40 years ago versus today, understanding that there's still a long way to go. But I'd love, and I think our listeners would appreciate just hearing your perspective of how workplace culture has evolved, over your 40-year career, and different things and steps that companies have taken to make the workplace more appealing to a broader and more diverse set of candidates.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I started out in business, and I mentioned I was in the menswear industry, it was, very unusual for a woman outside of maybe the design area whether that's the sales area or the business development area, to really have opportunity. And, my first year in business, I actually left the company because I realized that I wasn't going to be getting the opportunities. I wasn't part of the boys club, as you will. And, after that 1 year, I made a decision that whatever I did, I was only going to put myself in environments where I felt that I was going to be given equal opportunity if I performed at the level I needed to perform. I think the second thing that came to light for me very quickly in terms of working for different companies, I never felt that position gave me power. I always felt that impact gave me power, and impact was how I could contribute to other people's success and make sure that I was in an environment that valued that. I mentioned earlier, I worked for both Jeffrey Banks and Willie Smith, two amazing Black designers, in the 80s. And, if you look at that, that was also very unusual. And, Willie was one of the first designers to really bring street culture to life, to really realize at the intersection of culture and fashion and business, really was very, very powerful. So imagine in the 80s, the first designer who partnered with artists such as Keith Haring and Barbara Kruger and Christo to do interactions and to democratize fashion way before Target really owned that moniker.
It's interesting. So you had firsthand experience and exposure to how diversity in the workplace could really have a positive impact, which in some ways may have opened your mind and eyes in ways that it otherwise wouldn't.
It absolutely did, but it also let me see the other side of it. Not everybody embraced everything at every level. Unfortunately, Willie was one of the early victim of AIDS. And, the company really didn't have a go forward, let's call it strategy post that. But I was also fortunate to then go to work for Tommy Hilfiger, who I'm friends with to this day. And the reason that business became a juggernaut is, he defied the rules of, how to make fashion, really go across everyone, that it could come from street culture all the way up. And that was part of the company's culture. So, there was a consistency to what always got me engaged and intrigued about business. And one of the things, and probably the reason why I never went into the luxury business, and even when I was at Ralph, I was with his more accessible businesses, is I love businesses that are what I call aspirationally accessible. They can touch a lot of people. They can go across, all different areas of culture, but they build community. And that community becomes a diverse community that are all galvanized around what that business is doing. And that was very much Tommy. I really think it's what Ralph went to build, over time. Certainly an incredible example of that is Nike. If you think of, that business from its inception with Phil Knight, it was to be able to service the athlete in us all. And to this day, that's what they're trying to do. So to have those experiences, but, throughout those experiences, though, I had to make, different decisions. I was president at Chaps Ralph Lauren. I took the company from 20 million to 250 million. I took over the entire menswear business at Warnaco. And after 3 years, one day I walked in and I resigned. I didn't have another job. I had to work. I had, a young child, but I realized that the culture I was working in and the leadership of that organization was not aligned with my values. And that was another true revelation of how what was so important to me was ingrained in who I was, not only as a person, but as a leader. And I tell people this all of the time. Make sure that the values of the company, the leadership, the culture of what you want to be part of, because if not, you're going to be defined by that. And so, that decision that I made that day to go in and resign, although I tell people the story, the CEO, who actually happened to be a woman, said to me, you either have another job, you're independently wealthy, or you're stupid. And I say D, or none of the above. And after being escorted out a few hours later by security, I realized that as much as the uncertainty was, a bit challenging, I did the right thing. And 2 days later, Ralph called me and said, we're sorry you left, but there's no way we want you to be but with us. And went into the company, headed up new business development, and started Polo Jeans Company. So you
were true to yourself, but it led you in the right direction and on the right path. I'm sure most of our listeners can probably relate at various points in our career and our evolution as professionals. You find your happy place, and you find places where maybe you are not best positioned to kind of succeed and be true to yourself. And I think that's an interesting launching point, that as you progressed in your career and stepped into increasingly senior roles with more responsibility, it sounds like some of those experiences probably shaped the way you wanted to build culture and define the organizations you were leading.
Yeah, it absolutely, the experiences we have, for me, it's what were the takeaways and what could I provide in terms of leadership of the organization, of the culture, and of business. And I truly believe that culture, I've been quoted, culture trumps strategy. It does not mean you don't need a very cohesive and strong strategy to run the business. But if you're not building it on the platform of a passionate, engaged, diverse culture where people feel they belong, and that they will have success, ultimately, it's not going to have the sustainability. And particularly in today's world, if you want to attract the best talent, if you want to keep the best talent, if you want a collaborative and innovative workplace, you have to build that culture, and it has to come first. I'll never forget when I went to work for HSN, I was the 8th CEO in 10 years. And I immediately recognized that the number one thing, yes, I had to transform the business and I had to bring it forward. But if I didn't reignite the culture, nothing would happen because it was frozen. When you've had 8 CEOs in 10 years, you're just waiting for the next one to go. So my entire focus at the beginning was galvanizing people to believe in the future, to make myself very open in terms of what we had to do, recognize what people, were doing and what was necessary. And, one of the other takeaways, from having worked for a number of different leaders, I've always felt, and this year quantified that. I think you've all read many articles about the power of the words, vulnerability and empathy in business. That wasn't really considered an asset 10 years ago. If you use the word vulnerability, particularly as a woman, it would have been looked at as a weakness. Well, fast forward, it's being looked at as a strength. What your ability is to get in front of people and recognize what people are going through and give part of yourself to that as you build culture. I think it's very, very important. And we've seen a lot of examples of that. I think the other thing to me is whether you're building the culture within your organization or you're building a culture around, in our case, our members, or you're building a culture around the community at large. Community as a core asset to building your brand and your business is also of critical importance. And it doesn't matter what business you're in, it's still very important. And if you look at brands and businesses that are going to come through this with strength, regardless of what the impact was on their immediate business, are ones that have built a powerful community, a diverse community, a community of respect, a community of collaboration.
Mindy, one of the things you said was you try to build a culture where employees feel like they belong. And I think in today's business context, leaders are increasingly aware of diversity and inclusion initiatives, but don't necessarily know how to execute on it. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear, some examples just from your career of how you have advanced some of those, kind of diversity and inclusion initiatives at your businesses.
Yeah, I think it's really important that people realize that diversity is one thing, but diversity and inclusion is everything. I think the second thing that people need to understand, and I know the word initiative is used a lot, this is not an initiative. This is a cultural, critical aspect of how you build organization and how you aim to have impact. So to give you an example, when I joined Nike in 2000, I was the first person that they hired from the outside to run their global apparel business. And actually the first person who came out of the apparel industry, because it was normally out of kind of footwear going into apparel. And I was also the most senior woman in the organization. And after I'd been there just a short period of time, Phil Knight, who hired me, he'd come back into the business in 1999. He'd stepped out for a bit and the company had had some missteps. And he wanted to come back in and reignite. And he brought and built a whole new leadership team that I was very fortunate to be part of. I was also part of when they rolled out their new mission and vision, which was to bring innovation and inspiration to every athlete, asterisk, if you have a body, you're an athlete, to democratize, what they were doing. But he came to me and he said, Mindy, we have a problem and I need your help. He said, we are having, a great number of regrettable losses of women, talented women leaving the organization. And I really need to understand what we need to do. And I said, there's nothing I would like to do more. I said, but let's sit back and it's not just about women. Let's understand culturally what may be having an impact. So we ended up bringing in Catalyst and we did an inclusion survey. And again, that's why it's very important to think about inclusion. Do you feel part of something? Do you feel valued? And what came back is that even in areas where, on paper, it may have looked like we had diversity, X number of women in executive positions, et cetera, they weren't all being connected. And when you have a global matrixed organization at that scale, just hiring someone here or someone there does not make them feel like they're part of something and they have the opportunity to build their career path. So we actually presented a white paper to the board on the critical business imperative and the business case for diversity. We started our first Women's Leadership Council, and I'll never forget that first meeting. We brought in all the senior executive women from all over the world, many of them who had never, not just met, never even spoke to one another. And now you had a powerful group connected that could talk to each other, that could, talk about challenges or opportunities or be invested in each other's success. We also changed the hiring practices. So in order to, fill an open position, 50% of the qualified candidate pool had to be diverse. And then you had to make the decision. And the learnings from that were so powerful in terms of the impact it had, which certainly have stayed with me to this day. And one of the first things that I look at when I look at an organization and when I look at my leadership team is, do I have diversity? And diversity is age, race, gender, ethnicity, life stage, your background, where you come from, what are you bringing to the table? And is there something missing there when you're having conversation? And I think the expression I love the most is, are you enabling productive discomfort? Is there enough diversity and trust in the room that allows you to have the challenging conversations, but still come out at the end aligned on what you're doing and where you're going, so you can communicate that to the organization? And it's very difficult to have that if you don't have diversity of thought. And that goes for your board, your leadership team, and down through the levels of the organization. And it just needs to be part of everyone's thought process and even their evaluation of leadership is, are they fostering diverse groups and teams? And then the second part of that is, are they invested in others' success? And I always like to say that the reason I've had the success I've had is because I focused my career on making other people successful, which will mean I'll be more successful, the company will be more successful, I'll have a more diverse group around me because there are things that, I'm expert at and things that I'm not, but I want the balance. And, if I give you a second example, if you look at the WW board over the past number of years and how it's evolved significantly to reflect our new mission and vision of, we inspire healthy habits for real life, for people, families, communities, the world, for everyone, and being a brand that wants to democratize wellness, we have to reflect that at every area of the company. And I believe that how we've been able to manage through the pandemic and the last, number of years is because we've had diversity on the board and we've been able to have the conversations about what it is we need to do.
I think, you touch on the power of community, the power of connection. You even shared the anecdote from your time at Nike, where some of the senior female executives did not have much interaction with each other. I think most folks, if they reflect on their career, will say at various points in time, they have been the beneficiary of mentorship from different folks. And I'm fairly confident you have served as a mentor and role model for countless folks throughout your career. Going back, you started 40 years ago. You've been a lot of places, you've held a lot of roles. I'm curious if you have a leadership role model or, mentors you had along the way.
Yeah, so I've been very fortunate. I always like to say I have only worked for entrepreneurs my entire career. So I'm kind of an intrapreneur. And, I joke around that when I started Polo Jeans Company, I was an entrepreneur, but fortunately, I had other people's money to be able to launch it and didn't have to raise that on top of building the company. I think mentorship takes a lot of forms. I never was in a, let's call it structured mentorship program, although I did some of that when I was at Nike, but not necessarily myself. But I always did a lot of outreach. I mean, look, I had the opportunity to work for, a Tommy Hilfiger, a Barry Diller, a Phil Knight, a Ralph Lauren, and you take away something from each of them. And I have to say, Phil, to me, as a model of leadership in truly building a culture. And what I also loved about Phil, which a lot of people don't realize, he did not equate position with power. Phil had relationships with people at all levels of the organization. And he looked at people who he felt had impact or innovation or creativity or something that was going to be beneficial. So if you went to a strategic meeting with Phil, normally in companies, you just have your senior leadership. You'd have a very diverse group. And I've had that takeaway. And so I like to talk to people through all levels of the organization. At this point in my life, I do mentor a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people from different industries who are younger. And I think one of the strong assets that goes with the whole mentorship, conversation is, if you want to know someone, if you want to understand someone, if you want to create a connection, reach out. I mean, I am one of the most obsessively curious people you can find. I want to, if I hear someone interesting, I want to meet them. I want to have a conversation. And so I reach out. And so I say to people, what's the worst thing that could happen? They won't answer you. I've been known to, kind of follow people, right? If I really want to meet them. But, I think that's an asset. That's an asset. And I think people don't do that enough, is ask. And sometimes you can't do everything. I try and lend my voice to a lot of organizations, because if I've learned things, at this point in my life, one of the most powerful things I can do is share my platform and use it as a voice. And I think that's really important, especially today.
I think there are a number of lessons in, some of the anecdotes you've shared. I particularly love your mindset of trying to make other people around you successful. There's also a lesson in there that it sounds like you learned from Phil Knight: solicit input from folks throughout the organization. And impact is not necessarily a one-to-one relationship with position in the organization. Are there other characteristics of your leadership style that those around you might share when asked, hey, define Mindy as a leader?
So here's my perspective on leadership. I think the qualities of leadership are genderless. Let's take them out, right? There are people, they are able to set a vision. They're able to create the strategy around the vision. They're able to build strong cultures, collaborative teams, agile environments, galvanize people against that mission. They're humane. I think humanity is very important. They're willing to be vulnerable. They try and be acute listeners. I think all of those things are really important. They build networks, true networks, that are going to be able, in collectivity, help the business move forward. And then every leader has to bring their true self. I think one of the things that has always been important to me, especially for when I started in business, where women felt they had to be two separate people. They had to be a work person and a home person. And God, I have enough challenges just being one Mindy. The idea that I have to be two or bifurcate that. And so I just decided that was going to be important to me. And I was only going to work in environments that could respect that. So, I would, have my child come to work if I needed to. But, I traveled, at probably my most, I was gone 50% of the year, at my least 30% of the year. So you have to be your whole self and just be one person. And I think what helps when you do that is it sets like a comfort level for other people that they can do that too, that they can have their business life, they can have their personal life. You can't do everything at the same time, but you definitely can manage that way, and you can build a system of support around that. I think that's important. I mentioned, networks before. And I know for me, that's been very important. Like, who's my tribe? Who are the people you can call at 2 a.m? Who are the people you can reach out to? I'll never forget when I went to HSNi from Nike. It was a bit humbling, because you do realize who's true and who's not. When you're working for a company like Nike and you're one of the most senior women or with people in the company, you're kind of one of the cool kids. You go to a cocktail, who do you work for? When you go to do something, very challenging, at the time, that was a challenged business. It wasn't aspirational, and when I had to make phone calls to say, look, here's how I'm transforming the business, let me talk to you. I want your help. You really find out who the true people are. Now, that doesn't mean everyone's going to do what you want them to do, but it means they're open to listen. And what I've realized, especially for people who are looking to transform businesses or go into disrupting businesses, you see something, but not everybody's going to see it right away. Most people see what's in front, and you're seeing what you're going to build. And so you really want to surround yourself with people who are open, right? They may not even understand right out of the gate, but they'll listen and they'll be there to support and they'll communicate. And I think that's very important. And that's why, for me, I have a joke with my husband, who's a trader on, he's finance. I'm the one who's never shorted the stock, because I don't want to bet against anyone. I want to bet for someone. And not everything's going to work out. But, for people that do have a vision and they see the future, how many entrepreneurs had a number of failures before they had great successes? And we have to respect that, because that's where true innovation comes from.
It's interesting. That's a point I always reflect on a fair amount, because, we're in the business of backing entrepreneurs. And I reflect on a class I took in business school, is the history of capitalism. And each chapter tells the story of one of America's great entrepreneurs. And every single one of them had spectacular failures before they ultimately go on to achieve success. That's partly what's amazing about, kind of the American entrepreneurial spirit. There is the ability to kind of take risks and fail and pick yourself up and try again.
Yeah. And, the risk thing, I always say, and it was that pivotal moment for me when I left school, changed my entire trajectory. Not taking a risk, in my opinion, would have been riskier. And, Barry Diller, perfect quote, risk-taking and boldness are the essence of transformation. And I do joke, know there's a difference between risk and suicide. You do it
That's right.
strategically. But particularly in today's world, look how many people had to pivot over the past year. And in many cases, it is going to unlock such potential, because we had to rethink our businesses. We had to pivot. We had to be agile. We had to take different risks. And I think that's the course of business today, is to know strategically, what needs to happen when you do need to take, what level of risk are you going to take? And I think that's important. I think the other thing that's really important in today's world, and I'll give another, person who I've really had the opportunity to work with over the past 4 years, is Oprah. And, what's amazing about her is she practices what I call extreme discretion, or ultimate discretion. It's more important what you learn to say no to than what you ultimately say yes to. And that all of us, whether it's our company, whether it's us as individuals, we need to have a purpose filter. What is it that we are looking to achieve? what is important, what's our criteria. And so at WW, we actually, every employee has a purpose filter, and there's about 15 plus questions before you make a decision, before you make a hire, before you have a partner. What questions are you asking yourself? And ultimately, what does that tell you about the decision that you should make? And I've always used my purpose filter when I've made the moves in my career, even if for other people they've seemed very unconventional, they actually were very purposeful because of, what I felt the next was important. And not every move is a vertical move, right? Sometimes we make horizontal moves to learn new skills and new assets. And so I think, all of those things are really important today.
Mindy, I love your personal anecdote you shared where you said at some certain point in your career, you decided it was hard enough just managing one Mindy instead of home Mindy and work Mindy, and you decided to blend the two. And that probably also speaks to your comment that you want to create a workplace and an environment where people are comfortable and free to be themselves. Going back to where we started the conversation, you have, taken on the mantle of championing diversity and inclusion initiatives. What are your goals as it relates to diversity and inclusion, and what are you working towards on that front?
Yeah, so, I think we have not just an opportunity, but I truly feel we have a responsibility as individuals and as an organization to cultivate not just an internal community, but a global community that's diverse, equitable, and inclusive, particularly as it relates to health equity around the world. And, somebody once asked me, I don't know, what would success look like? And I said, success will really be predicated on, are we truly changing the trajectory of the health of the world? And are we creating equity around the health disparities that we have? In addition to our work at WW, we started WW Good to help give underserved communities access to healthy food. We spearheaded the Healthy Living Coalition. We now have over 28 partners, from Bank of America to JP Morgan to Chobani to Beyond Meat to Feeding America to Vitamin Angels to Vitamin Shop. And what we're trying to do is advocate around SDG 2 goals of good food for all and just healthy living as a human right. And that's around advocacy, action, and investment. So what are the things that we can do? It's why I'm passionate about my work with the U.S. Fund for UNICEF, and other organizations that I'm part of in the education field. And again, you want to have the greatest impact you can, of course, on your business responsibilities to all of your stakeholders, but ultimately, what are you doing that can also have an impact societally? And, that is of critical importance to our organization as well as to myself.
Mindy, you talked a little bit about discretion as a lesson learned from your dear friend, Oprah. And on that point, I'd like to say, we appreciate you saying yes to this podcast. I think we all want to have an impact. And it's really great talking to you because I think you've had an impact on a number of fronts. And there's a lot to learn and a lot of wisdom in hearing, kind of your story and your experiences. My question for you, what actions can we, myself, our listeners, take to support, different diversity and inclusion efforts? We're not going to use the word initiative. Foundational efforts in the workplace?
Well, first of all, thank you for that. I think the most important thing is you really need to be intentional and strategic. It's not some goals on a piece of paper. There has to be accountability. There has to be action, and there has to be measurement, and there have to be goals. I think that's of critical importance. This is not a check the box exercise. This is something that you have to live. It has to come from the CEO throughout the organization and from the bottom up. And people have to feel it's a significant part of what the ultimate success of the business is going to be. But I'm also a believer that if you measure it, and you define it and you hold yourself accountable, it becomes human nature. I always say it's what we're trying to do at WW is create long-term sustainable behavior change for life. It's no different, right? This is for life. And
yeah, it's one of our CEOs likes to say, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. That applies to financial metrics. It also applies to life habits and healthy eating.
Absolutely.
Mindy, you have been remarkably generous with your time today. I always enjoy having the opportunity to catch up with you. I learned a few new things today that we hadn't covered in previous conversations. And I know our listeners are certainly going to enjoy having the opportunity to hear some of your learnings over the course of your career. And thank you for all the hard work and impact you're having on another number of fronts. It's very inspirational for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you again for inviting me. Great to have the conversation.
All right, terrific. Thanks so much.